Just imagine for a second. You're just living your life, and bam, suddenly everything changes.
Yeah.
You're ripped away from your family, your friends, your life as you know it, and all because you're accused of something you didn't do.
Yeah, it's a nightmare scenario, really.
Yeah, it's a total nightmare. And that's exactly what happened to JJ. For almost 25 years, he fought for his freedom.
It's a story that really makes you think about, well, the strength of the human spirit,
I mean,
right?
absolutely. You sent us this really powerful audio story, Letters from Sing Sing. And it's incredible. It goes way beyond, just the legal side of things.
Right, it digs into the emotional impact.
It does, the whole roller coaster of emotions that JJ goes through.
Like trying to rebuild your life after something like that. How do you even begin?
Exactly. So let's start with the moment he's released. After 24 years, he's finally free.
You can just feel that overwhelming sense of relief and joy in the story.
Oh, absolutely. He talks about seeing his family again, hugging his mother and his sons.
And just that feeling of being free again after so long.
There's this detail, I don't know if you remember it, where he talks about sleeping on a comfortable couch for the first time in decades.
Oh, yeah.
Like something we take for granted, but for him, it's this huge symbol of freedom.
It is. He even describes going to, I think it was Walgreens, and just buying a toothbrush, soap, moisturizer.
Everyday things.
Yeah, exactly. Everyday things that most people wouldn't think twice about. But for him, they represent this, return to normalcy.
It's like he's rediscovering the world, experiencing it all over again.
Right. But then there's this other side to it, the lost time.
How do you make up for 20 years?
It's a question that really haunts the story. I mean, the world had completely changed while he was away, especially technology.
Yeah, he talks about struggling with, I think it was a wireless printer,
Yeah, he turns to YouTube for help.
like we all do.
Exactly. But even then, he needs his son to just press a button to fix it.
And it's funny, but also kind of heartbreaking, right?
It is. It is. It makes you think about how much we rely on technology these days and what it means to be left behind.
Like digital literacy and how important that is now.
It's a whole other challenge for people who've been disconnected for so long.
And then there's the whole emotional weight of being away from his sons, watching them grow up from behind
You're
bars.
missing all those milestones, the everyday
It's
moments.
just a chance to be a dad.
It's a loss that's hard to even fathom.
But here's the amazing thing. Despite all of that, he doesn't turn his back on the prison system.
No, instead, he decides to go back in as a program director for the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice.
For those who might not know, can you tell us a little bit about what that project does?
Sure. So the Frederick Douglass Project is all about, well, trying to create a more humane prison system.
Okay.
They work to restore dignity to people who are incarcerated, helping them prepare for life outside.
So helping to bridge that gap between prison life and the real world.
Exactly.
And they use things like dialogue and storytelling to do this.
Yeah, they believe that even in prison, there's still shared humanity.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But I imagine it can't be easy setting up these programs, creating these safe spaces.
No, it's definitely not easy. You're dealing with a lot of, well, mistrust,
Yeah.
power dynamics.
Because these are people who have been marginalized, dehumanized by the system,
Exactly. So building trust takes time, it takes empathy.
and a willingness to listen without judgment.
Exactly. You have to see the person,
Yeah.
recognize their worth, their dignity, no matter what they may have done.
In the audio story, JJ talks about this really moving moment he witnessed.
Yeah, it was a group of incarcerated men with their families just sharing stories, laughing together.
And he describes it as this, like a glimpse of hope.
Right. That even in a place like prison, human connection can still thrive.
It's really beautiful. So from navigating the world outside to going back into the system to try to make it better, JJ is doing some incredible work.
And then there's this whole other layer to his story. He gets invited to the White House,
Oh.
and the president apologizes to him.
Can you imagine?
It must have been surreal.
I can't even begin to.
In the story, you can just hear the emotion in his voice as he's describing it,
A sense of validation.
but also the recognition that an apology, while important, doesn't erase what happened.
It doesn't change the past.
Right. And it doesn't mean that the fight for justice is over.
Because, as we said earlier, an apology isn't the same as exoneration.
Exactly. And JJ's still on parole, still facing all those restrictions.
So he's out of prison, but he's not truly free.
It's this weird paradox, right?
It is, and it really highlights how the impact of incarceration, even when it's wrongful, can linger for so long.
It's like these invisible bars.
Speaking of which, what are some of the specific challenges that come with being on parole?
Well, there are a lot of conditions like having to check in regularly with a parole officer.
And limits on travel where you can work.
All these things that can make it really difficult to rebuild your life.
It's like you're supposed to be reintegrating into society, but then you're also facing all these obstacles.
Right, it's a real catch-22.
And there's also the stigma that comes with having a criminal record, even if you were wrongfully convicted.
Oh, absolutely. It can affect everything from finding a job to housing.
It makes you really think about what true freedom actually means.
Yeah, and what it takes to truly rebuild your life after something like this.
Especially when the system itself is still holding you back in some ways.
It's a long and complicated journey, that's for sure.
It is. But, in JJ's story, there's also this incredibly powerful theme of family and the importance of support.
Oh, absolutely. His family never gave up on him.
They were there for him through it all.
And their support was crucial in helping him cope and helping him rebuild.
There are these really heartwarming moments in the story where he talks about reconnecting with his family.
Simple things like family dinners, going out together.
And then he becomes a grandfather.
Yeah, twin granddaughters.
And you can just feel the joy in his voice when he talks about them.
It's beautiful.
It is. It's like, even amidst all the hardship, there's still this incredible love and connection.
And that's what ultimately helps him get through it.
Now, we've talked about the apology from the president
Yeah,
and the fact that it doesn't erase the past or equal exoneration.
right.
But in his case, there's also the possibility of actual legal exoneration.
There is, yeah. There's a new district attorney in Manhattan who's taking a fresh look at some of these old cases.
And this brings a whole new layer of hope to JJ's story, doesn't it?
It does. But it also highlights how difficult it can be to get true justice.
So what are some of the factors that contribute to these miscarriages of justice in the first place?
Well, one of the biggest problems is eyewitness testimony.
You mean when someone identifies the wrong person?
Exactly. Studies have shown that it happens more often than you'd think,
Our memories are so fallible.
especially under stress, or trauma.
And then there's the issue of coerced confessions.
Yeah, sometimes innocent people will confess to a crime they didn't commit just because of the pressure they're under.
Oh, wow. That's scary to think about.
And then there's the problem of inadequate legal representation.
Meaning, not everyone has access to good lawyers.
Right. And that can make a huge difference in the outcome of a case.
So there are a lot of different points in the system where things can go wrong.
And unfortunately, JJ's story isn't unique. There are so many people who are wrongfully incarcerated still fighting for their freedom.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes you wonder, how do we prevent these wrongful convictions from happening in the first place?
Well, there are some reforms that could help, like stricter protocols for eyewitness identification.
And recording interrogations, so there's a record of what happened.
Yeah. And making sure everyone has access to good legal counsel.
But it seems like there also needs to be a cultural shift within the justice system itself.
Oh, absolutely. We need to move away from this win at all costs mentality.
And focus on truth and justice instead of just getting convictions. So it's about prioritizing accuracy and fairness.
And being willing to admit when mistakes have been made and then correcting them.
Because at the end of the day, the justice system is made up of people, and people make mistakes.
And those mistakes have real consequences.
And speaking of mistakes, we talked about the presidential apology and how it doesn't equate to legal justice.
Right.
It was a symbolic gesture, but it doesn't change the fact that JJ is still fighting for exoneration.
And that fight can be long and difficult.
Especially when you're up against a system that can be very slow to admit its own flaws.
But JJ's story also shows us that even in the face of such adversity, there's still room for hope, for healing.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes his story so powerful. It's not just about the injustice he faced. It's also about his resilience, his strength, his determination to rebuild his life.
Yeah. And the incredible support he received from his family.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's still light to be found.
And that the human spirit can endure incredible hardships.
So, as we continue to delve into JJ's story, let's keep that in mind. Let's focus not just on the wrongs that were committed, but also on the possibility of redemption, of healing, of finding hope, even in the most challenging of circumstances.
Because ultimately, that's what makes his story so inspiring. It's a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity and to find meaning and purpose, even in the face of unimaginable pain.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world, a world where stories like JJ's become the exception, not the rule.
And that's a goal worth striving for.
It certainly is. And it really highlights how the impact of incarceration lingers even after you're released.
It's true. It's not like you just walk out of those prison gates and everything's fine.
Exactly. There are so many invisible bars that remain.
It's not just the legal restrictions either. There's the psychological and emotional toll, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. The story talks about this mental and emotional bondage that JJ feels, even though he's physically free.
Exactly. It's like this feeling of being trapped even when you're not.
And I imagine it can be really hard to reconcile that,
Yeah.
to be physically free but still feel confined in some way.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really complex process, and that's where having a good support system can make such a huge difference.
Like family, friends, community.
Exactly. Having those people around you can really help you navigate all those challenges of reentry.
And that's something that really shines through in JJ's story, the love and support of his family.
Yeah, they never gave up on him. They were there for him every step of the way.
And it's interesting how the story balances those moments of joy, those family connections, with the ongoing struggles of parole.
It's a realistic picture, right? Reentry isn't always easy.
No, there are a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah, you have those moments of hope, but then you also have those setbacks.
And it's not just JJ who's impacted. His family goes through it too.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that his son John talks about in the story.
John reflects on his father's experience and how it shaped him.
Yeah, he talks about how his dad's strength, his resilience, inspired him.
It's incredible how, even in the midst of such hardship, there can be these moments of growth, of transformation.
It's a testament to the human spirit, right? Our ability to find meaning in suffering, to forge deeper connections through adversity.
And speaking of finding meaning, let's talk about JJ's case and the potential for exoneration.
Right, with this new district attorney in Manhattan, there's a renewed hope that justice might finally be served.
So this new DA, Alvin Bragg, is taking a fresh look at things.
Yeah, he's reviewing some of these old cases, looking for potential wrongful convictions.
And that's a huge step in the right direction.
It is. It is. But it also highlights how hard it can be to get true justice, you know?
What are some of the factors that contribute to these miscarriages of justice in the first place?
Well, one of the biggest issues is flawed eyewitness testimony.
Meaning someone misidentifies the perpetrator.
Yeah, and it happens more often than you'd think.
It's scary to think about how unreliable our memories can be.
Especially when you're talking about a high-stress situation like witnessing a crime.
And then there's the issue of coerced confessions.
Yeah, where someone confesses to a crime they didn't commit, maybe because they're under duress or intense pressure.
It's hard to even fathom.
And then there's also the issue of inadequate legal representation.
Meaning not everyone has access to a good lawyer.
Right, and that can make a huge difference in the outcome of a case.
So there are a lot of different points in the system where things can go wrong.
And unfortunately, JJ's story is just one example of many. There are countless others who remain wrongfully incarcerated, fighting for their freedom.
It's a sobering thought. And it makes you wonder, what can we do to prevent these wrongful convictions from happening?
Well, there are some reforms that could help, like implementing stricter protocols for eyewitness identification.
Making sure that witnesses aren't influenced or pressured in any way.
Exactly. And recording interrogations, so there's a clear record of what happened.
And ensuring that everyone has access to competent legal counsel.
Right, that's essential.
But it seems like it goes beyond just those specific reforms.
Oh, definitely. There needs to be a shift in the culture of the justice system itself.
Like moving away from that win-at-all-costs mentality.
Yeah, the focus should be on truth and justice, not just on getting convictions.
So it's about accuracy, fairness, and a willingness to admit when mistakes have been made.
And then to actually correct those mistakes,
Because ultimately the justice system is made up of people, and people are fallible.
Exactly. And we need to acknowledge that and create a system that's more accountable and more focused on rehabilitation rather than just punishment.
And that brings us back to that presidential apology.
Yeah, it was a powerful gesture.
But it doesn't change the fact that JJ is still fighting for exoneration.
Right, and that fight can be incredibly long and difficult.
Especially when you're up against a system that could be very slow to change.
It's true. But JJ's story also shows us that even in the face of such adversity, there's still room for hope.
Absolutely. His story is about resilience, about strength, about the determination to rebuild your life, even when it feels like everything's been taken from you.
And about the power of family and community support.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's still light to be found.
And that the human spirit can endure incredible hardships.
So, as we continue to explore JJ's story, let's keep that in mind. Let's focus not just on the injustices he faced, but also on the possibility of redemption, of healing, of finding hope, even the most challenging of circumstances.
Because that's what makes his story so powerful, so inspiring.
It's a testament to the human capacity for growth, for change, for finding meaning and purpose, even in the face of immense pain.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
A world where stories like JJ's become the exception, not the rule.
Exactly.
And as we talk about JJ's story and all the issues it brings up, it's hard not to think about the bigger picture of mass incarceration in this country.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
The U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world.
It's a pretty shocking statistic when you think about it.
It is. And it's not just the numbers, it's who's being incarcerated.
Yeah, the racial disparities are really troubling.
People of color are disproportionately represented in the prison system?
It's a reflection of the systemic inequalities in our society.
Absolutely. Poverty, lack of opportunity, racism, all these factors contribute to mass incarceration.
And it creates this vicious cycle,
Where people are trapped in a system that's stacked against them.
Exactly. And the consequences are devastating, not just for the individuals, but for families and communities as a whole.
JJ's story really brings that home, doesn't it? The years he lost with his sons, the impact on his family. It's a reminder of the human cost of mass incarceration.
It makes you question our priorities as a society,
Are we really addressing the root causes of crime? Or are we just perpetuating a system that's broken?
Those are the tough questions we need to be asking.
And stories like JJ's can help us start those conversations.
They can shed light on the flaws in the system, the need for reform.
So before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the importance of individual action.
Yeah, what can we do to actually make a difference?
It can feel overwhelming, right? Like one person can't change the whole system.
It's true, but even small actions can have an impact.
Like what?
Well, for one, educate yourself.
Learn about the issues.
Exactly. Understand the complexities of the criminal justice system.
Challenge your own biases.
Because knowledge is power.
So read stories like JJ's, have conversations with people who have different perspectives.
And then take that knowledge and turn it into action.
Support organizations working on criminal justice reform.
Advocate for policies that promote fairness and equity.
Make your voice heard.
Because change happens from the ground up.
It starts with individuals speaking out, demanding justice.
And holding our leaders accountable.
JJ's story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can endure.
And that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and compassionate world.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we leave you with this question. What will you do to make a difference? How will you contribute to a future where justice prevails? JJ's journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, and the importance of fighting for what's right. Let's carry his story with us and work together to create a world where everyone has a chance at true freedom and justice.